Let's take a look at solving quadratic equations by completing a square. The first topic we're going to take a look at is square root property. And don't see my tablet up and running, so I guess that's my first step, is get the tablet. Here we go. Square root property. Square root property says if you got something squared equal to something else, then you're going to drop a squared and you put a plus or minus square root around the other side. Now that's pretty vague. If you got something squared equal to something else, but it really is meant to be that vague. You could have a single variable over here, you could have a binomial, trinomial, you could have anything, just as long as it's something squared equal to something else. Let's take a look at some problems dealing with this. We got x squared is equal to 25. Now this property says the entire left side has to be squared. As I look at this problem right here, I see the entire left side squared, so we can apply our square root property directly. So we drop our squared, and we put a plus or minus square root around the other side. Now always you should simplify your radicals before you go on. 25 is 5 times 5. And remember, with square roots, we're looking for pairs of something. Here's a pair of 5s, so this pair of 5 is going to come out in front as a single 5. So we got x is equal to plus or minus 5. Now that's our answer. If you're not familiar with this notation, what that means is it means we got x is equal to negative 5, and we got x is equal to positive 5. So we got two answers. Typically, a simplified form means you leave it with what I circled. Take a look at our second example. We got w squared minus 4 is equal to 20. Notice on this particular problem, the entire left side isn't squared. So our first step is to get the part that's squared by itself. So I'm going to take this negative 4 and move it to the right side. So we get w squared is equal to 20 plus 4. Remember, you move anything across your equals, your sign changes, so negative 4 becomes a positive 4. Add those together, 20 plus 4 is 24. Now the entire left side squared, so that's all our square root property says. You got something squared equal to something else. So we drop our squared, and we put a plus or minus square root around the other side. Always you should simplify your radicals. 24 is 248 times 3. Remember, the square root, we're looking for pairs of something. Here's a pair of 2s, so this pair of 2 is going to come out in front as a single 2. So we got w is equal to plus or minus 2. And we got a 2 and 3 left inside, and again, we have to have pairs of them to bring them out, so all we'll do is multiply those together. 2 times 3 is 6. So our answer is w is equal to plus or minus 2 square root of 6. Let's take a look at this problem. We got negative 5x squared minus 2 is equal to 18. Obviously, the entire left side isn't squared, so let's work on getting the part that's squared by itself. I'm going to take the negative 2 and move it to the right side. Remember, when you take anything across your equals, your sign changes. So negative 2 becomes a positive 2. And then 18 plus 2 is 20. Now the only thing that's squared is the x. The negative 5 isn't squared, so we still don't have it in the right form yet. The entire left side has to be squared. Well, to get the part that's squared by itself, we'll divide both sides by negative 5. And do that. We get x squared, and 20 divided by negative 5 gives us a negative 4. And now it is in the right form. We got something squared equal to something else. Square root property says we drop our squared, and we put a plus or minus square root around the other side. Now we want to simplify our radical now. negative 4. That's negative 1 times 2 times 2. If you remember from complex numbers, negative 1 inside of a square root comes out as an I. And here we got a pair of 2's. A pair of 2's is going to come out in front as a single 2. So we're going to have x is equal to plus or minus 2i. And that's our answer. Okay, let's look at this one. We got 3x minus 2 squared equals to 9. Now right away this is already in the right form. We got something squared equal to something else. So square root property says we drop our squared and we put a plus or minus square root around the other side. Now always you should simplify your radicals before you go on. So in this case we got 9, which is 3 times 3. And remember the square root, we're looking for a pair of somethings. So here we got a pair of 3's. They're going to come out in front as a single 3. So we got 3x minus 2 is equal to plus or minus 3. Now I took everything out of the radical, so the radical just disappears. Now our goal is to get the x by itself. So I'm going to take this negative 2 and move it to the right side. So we got 3x is equal to 2 plus or minus 3. And then I want to divide both sides by 3 in order to get the x by itself. And we get x is equal to 2 plus or minus 3 over 3. Sometimes it's beneficial to split it apart into the plus side and the minus side. When is it beneficial to do this? When your radical disappears and it looks like maybe you can do a little bit more simplifying. Now our first problem here, a radical disappeared, we got plus or minus 5, but obviously putting those into two separate pieces doesn't simplify. But let's see what happens in this problem. What that plus or minus means is we're going to have x is equal to 2 plus 3 over 3, and we'll have x is equal to 2 minus 3 over 3. Now see, after I split those up into two separate pieces, I can simplify it. 2 plus 3 is 5, so we got x is equal to 5/3. And over here we got 2 minus 3, which is negative 1, so we got x is equal to negative 1/3. And those are our two answers. Let's take a look at one more, and then we'll take a look at completing the square. So we got x plus 5/2 squared is equal to 7/4. Now again, all the square root property says is if you got something squared equal to something else, then you can apply it. So we'll apply it here. We'll drop our squared, and we'll put a plus or minus square root around the other side. Well, we got a problem here. Remember when we were working with radicals, we said you can't have a fraction inside of a radical. But we've got a property. It says that if you got a fraction inside of a radical, you can put a radical around top, radical around the bottom. So we're going to have square root of 7 over square root of 4. Now that creates another issue. We also said you can't have a radical in the denominator. But in this case, it's going to work out nice. But square root of 4, 4 is 2 times 2. So we can simplify this radical. Remember with square roots, looking for pairs of something. Here's a pair of 2's. They're going to come out in front as a single 2. So we got x plus 5/2 is equal to plus or minus square root of 7 over 2. Now our goal is to get the x by itself, so I'm going to take this 5/2 and move it over. And we got x is equal to negative 5/2 plus or minus square root of 7 over 2. Typically simplified form, unless you have an imaginary part, an I, typically simplified form means merge into a single fraction. And especially these are so easy because they got the same denominator. So it's going to become negative 5 plus or minus square root of 7 all over 2. And that would be our answer. Well, let's take a look at completing the square now. Okay, completing the square. Excuse me. Step 1. We want to divide everything, all the terms, by the number in front of the x squared. Step 2 is we want to take the number, the constant term, to the right side. Step 3, take the number in front of the x, the coefficient, multiply it by 1/2, square it, and then add to both sides. Step 4, factor the left side. And step 5, use the square root property to solve for x. Okay, let's take a look at some problems dealing with this. And it goes in, this is the easiest type, then we'll look at the medium difficulty, and then we'll look at the hardest type. So we got x squared minus 8x plus 2 is equal to 0. Step 1. Divide everything by the number in front of the x squared. We don't have a number in front of our x squared, so we don't have to do step 1 here. Step 2. Take the number constant term to the right side. So I'm going to take this positive 2 and take it to the right side. So we got x squared minus 8x is equal to negative 2. Step 3. Take the number in front of the x. Number in front of our x is a negative 8. And you do this over and aside. Multiply it by 1/2 squared. So we're multiplying it by 1/2 and we're squaring it. It's always times a half and it's always squared. Well, negative 8 times 1/2 is negative 4. And negative 4 squared gives us a positive 16. It says, then add to both sides. So we're going to have x squared minus 8x plus 16 is equal to negative 2 plus 16. Which gives us x squared minus 8x plus 16 is equal to negative 2 plus 16 gives us 14. Step 4. Factor the left side. This is going to factor as x minus 4 squared. Now there's a little bit of a trick to this. Whatever number's right here, right before you square it, sign included, this negative 4 is always what goes right here. So if this had been a negative 7, we would have put a negative 7 here. If you remember that, that makes that step so easy. There's really no factoring at all. Step 5. Use the square root property to solve for x. Again, the square root property says if you got something squared equal to something else, you drop your squared, and you put a plus or minus square root around the other side. Now 14 doesn't simplify, it's 2 times 7. So last thing we want to do to get the x by itself is take the negative 4 over, and we get x is equal to 4 plus or minus square root of 14. And that's our answer. Now what makes that the easiest type is there's an even number before your x. Now let's look at a medium difficulty. We got x squared plus 3x plus 5 is equal to 0. What this makes this a medium difficulty is we got an odd number before our x. Same steps. Step 1. Divide everything by the number in front of the x squared. There's still no number in front of our x squared, so we don't have to do that step yet. Step 2. Take the number constant term to the right side. So we got x squared plus 3x equals, and take the 5 over and becomes a negative 5. Step 3. take the number in front of the x, which in this case is a positive 3, multiply it times a half, and square it. It's always times a half, it's always squared. Now you don't want to change these to decimal. If you change them to decimal, you're probably going to get a certain percentage of these wrong. 3 times 1/2 gives us 3/2. And we're going to square it then. When you square a fraction, you have to square the top part and square the bottom part. 3 squared is 9, 2 squared is 4. So we get 9/4. What makes this a medium difficulty is whenever you have an odd number for your x, you'll always have fractions appear like this. And then it says to add that to both sides. So I got x squared plus 3x plus 9/4 equals -5 plus 9/4. So I got x squared plus 3x plus 9/4. Now, if you're not very good with fractions, plug this in your calculator. So we got, I'm in graph mode here. I'm going to do a second mode to exit out. And then I'll do -5 plus 9 divided by 4. Just type in exactly as you see it, and then press enter. And once you get decimal, then you do math, enter, enter. Now change it to fraction. And you see we got -11/4. Now if we were to do that by hand, this is a mixed number. So we're going to take the number out in front, the -5, multiply it times the 4. -5 times 4 gives us -20, and then we're going to add the number up on top. -20 plus 9 gives us -11, and our denominator stays as is. Step 4, factor the left side. This would be kind of a hard problem for me to work if I didn't remember the trick. This is x plus 3/2 squared is equal to -11/4. Again, whatever number's in the parentheses right here, right before you square it, sign included, is always what goes right here. So again, there is no factoring there, just whatever number's right there, you just bring straight over to here. Okay, step 5. Use the square root property to solve for x. Again, if you got something squared equal to something else, square root property says drop your squared. So I got x plus 3/2, and then you put a plus or minus square root around the other side. Well, we've said before we can't have a fraction inside of a square root. But we've got a property. It says we can split it up. You can put a square root around top, and you can put a square root around the bottom. Which creates a separate issue, because we said we can't have a radical in denominator. But that's okay, because square root of 4 is 2. Now up on top, notice we got a negative inside of our square root. If you remember what a negative inside of your square root gives you an I. So this is going to become square root of 11, and I'll go ahead and put the I to the side, like that. Again, negative inside of a square root gives you an I. Now we're solving for x, so I'm going to take the 3/2 and move it over. So we got x is equal to -3/2 plus or minus square root 11 over 2i. And that's our answer. I don't try to merge that into a single fraction because we got an imaginary part. If you got an imaginary part, you leave them separate like that. Okay, well, let's look at our hardest type now. This one here. We got 3x squared minus 5x plus 1 equals 0. Okay, step 1. Divide everything by the number in front of your x squared. Number in front of our x squared is 3, so we're going to divide everything by 3. So 3 divided by 3x squared minus 5 divided by 3x plus 1 divided by 3 is equal to 0 divided by 3. These 3 is going to cancel, and we got x squared minus 5/3 x plus 1/3 equals 0 divided by 3 is 0. Now what makes this the hardest type is not the fact you actually have to do step 1. Because it could have worked out nice. This could have been a 6 in front of my x. And then 6 divided by 3 would have given us a 2. And 2 before our x would make it the easiest type. What makes it the hardest type is you not only have to divide by that number, but then you end up with a fraction inside of your x. So it makes it a touch more difficult than a medium type. Step 2. Take your number, your constant term, to the right side. So we're going to have x squared minus 5/3 x equals, and take the 1/3 over, it becomes a negative 1/3. Step 3. Take the number before your x, which is negative 5/3, multiply it times a half, and square it. Well, negative 5 times 1 is negative 5. 3 times 2 is 6 squared. And square the top, square the bottom. Negative 5 squared is 25, and 6 squared gives us 36. And then add that to both sides. So I got x squared minus 5/3 x plus 25 over 36 is equal to negative 1/3 plus 25 over 36. Now I'm going to show in a minute how to do this by actually, let me go ahead and do it here, and then I'll show you how to do it in the calculator. So I got x squared minus 5/3 x plus 25 over 36. Okay, maybe you're not very good with fractions. Again, I'm going to show you how to plug this in the calculator in a second, but let me show it by hand. If you're going to add or subtract fractions, you should get common denominators. So my common denominator would be 36. And I want to rewrite each fraction with that new denominator. Well, this one already had a 36, so I left it alone. My first fraction, I multiplied the bottom part by 12, so I multiply the top part by 12. So it becomes a negative 12 over 36. One technique in getting the common denominator is you first just glance at your largest number, in this case the 36, and that's in our denominator, of course. And then you look at your other number, the other denominator, which is 3, and you ask yourself, does that divide into that evenly? If it does, then your largest denominator is your common denominator. Okay, so let's add those together now. We got x squared minus 5/3 x plus 25 over 36 equals, since these have the same denominator, I can add or subtract the top parts. Negative 12 plus 25 gives us 13/36. Okay, let me show you the easy way now. Using the calculator, negative 1/3 plus 25/36. So do negative 1 divided by 3 plus 25 over 36. Then I press enter, and we get a decimal, so we do math, enter, enter. And you see we get 13 over 36, what we did by hand. Step 4. Factor the left side. Again, it'd be kind of hard to do if we didn't remember a trick. So this is going to be x minus 5/6 squared equals 13 over 36. Again, whatever numbers inside your parentheses, right before you square it, sign included, is always what goes right here. Step 5. Use the square root property to solve for x. If we have something squared equals something else, we drop our squared, and we put a plus or minus square root around the other side. Now, always you should address your radicals before you go any further. And right away, we see we have a fraction inside of a square root. Can't have that. So we got a property. It says we can split it up. Let's put a square root around top and square root around the bottom. So we've got square root of 13 over square root of 36. Which creates another problem. We can't have a radical in denominator. But that's okay, because square root of 36 gives us 6. Okay, now I'm going to take this negative 5/6, move it to the right side, and we got x is equal to 5/6 plus minus square root of 13 over 6. Remember what I said earlier, a simplified form means, if possible, get a single fraction. So in this one, especially, they already have the same denominator, so it doesn't get any easier than that. We just put top parts together. So we got 5 plus or minus square root of 13 all over 6. Forgive my horrible writing, but that would be your answer. And I believe the last problem in this, yes it is, the last problem in this lecture.